Let's start building our cluster. You could build this as just a pendant, building it flat, but we're going to build it on top of a ring. So let's start in the jeweler's bench and click on the ring size builder. And I'm going to set that to US size 7 with a top offset of just 1.7. You may have to adjust that number depending on the size of the stones you choose, but that works out for the size I'll use for this demo. So validate that, and we'll select the ring size builder and build our first center stone. And I'm going to make that 2 millimeters. And you can choose whatever material you like. I have diamond, and validate that. Okay, let's go ahead and build our belts for that center stone. So I'm going to click the center stone and click on belts. And from the front view, we'll zoom in here. We're going to set the size of that top belt to 1.8 millimeters, so slightly larger than the stone. And then we're going to move it manually up to the edge of the stone so that it's sitting right up to the pavilion. Okay, looks to be about negative 0.45 in the Z. Let's go ahead and put that in there. Give us a nice even number to work with. We're going to use that again later, so make a note of that. Okay, for the top belt, we're just going to leave it at 0.5 millimeter. Bottom belt the same, but we're going to make the spacing 1 millimeter. And you see that works out perfectly with where we set our offset. Again, you may have to adjust these numbers if you change your middle stone size. And we're going to set the angle to 0. So it's the exact same size as the top belt. For this center one, I'm going to go ahead and bend it along the U a bit, about 1/3 of the way. It should match your finger shape. Something like that. Go ahead and validate that. I'm going to select the ring size builder again, and we'll build our first cluster stone, or the outside stone. And we're going to set that at 2 millimeters as well. Again, experiment with different sizes when you build yours if you'd like. I'm going to keep everything nice and even for this first one. And then we're going to move it in the Y direction. And that should be negative 2.1 millimeters to give a little bit of a gap between the stones. And go ahead and validate that. Okay, now we're going to build our belts for the outside. So we'll do another set of belts. And we're going to set this exactly the same way. So 1.8. And we set that height was negative 0.45. Go to the bottom belt, and it was 1 millimeter space with a 0 degree angle. Now this one we don't need to bend. We'll leave it flat for the outside one. You'll see why in a minute. Validate that. Okay, now we can circular duplicate. So go back to the solid module, circular duplicate, and we have 6 copies should fit around. Again, adjust that for different stone sizes. And we'll repeat that with the belts. Circular duplicate 6 times and validate that. Okay. So next up, we have a flat bottom here for the cluster. We're going to bend that to match the finger. So we need to filter our belts. So we just bend the bottom section. So we're going to go down to the group section, filter, and just turn red all of the bottom 6, and make sure you check create another subgroup. Now we'll take that subgroup and do a deform symmetrical bend. From the front view, I'm going to select this red indicator here at the bottom and then use the slider. And it's sensitive. We get it right in there. It looks to be 40 degrees. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, looks about 41 degrees. And we'll validate that. Okay. If you want to make selection easier later, we'll go ahead and group all of our belts together. And we'll create a new group called belts. Okay. And now we'll go ahead and create the prongs. So I'm going to go back to the jeweler's bench, create a single prong, and I'm going to set that at 0, 0, and 0 for now. We'll adjust that in a bit. 0.5 millimeter diameter with a height of, let's go with 3 millimeters with a rounded top for the mode. Okay, so we're going to use the Pave Prongs tool, which works wonderfully anytime you have a group of stones that are evenly spaced like this. Pave Prongs will fill in really nicely with your prongs, even if it's not a pave. So we're going to select all the stones and the prong and click on Pave Prongs. And you see it does give us a nice pattern. And we'll go here to the top, and in the second tab we're going to adjust the minimum number of prongs to 5, so we get our outside prong as well. And then our offset border prongs, we need to move this out a little bit, so we're just going to add, I'm going to roll my mouse wheel inside the box here a couple of times, so add 0.2 to that, so 0.6 to fit our outside prongs inside there. And just validate that. Now, of course, our prongs are too tall. We need to adjust the height of our prongs. So we're going to go back underneath Pave Prongs, double click the original prong, and we're going to drop it in the Z. I'm going to guess about, I think it's negative 2.5, and recalculate. Okay, so again, you may have to play with those numbers. Just go back and edit the prong. I do want them sticking through the finger a bit, because of the bend in the bottom of our cluster. But we just want to get it so the height looks right and we've got plenty of extra sticking through. So to trim those up, we're going to select that group of prongs and our finger size, our ring size builder. And in the editing tools here in the jeweler's bench, you're going to click on trim to finger size. So this is going to trim them all to the finger size, but I want to offset it a bit, so we're going to add a 0.2 offset so that it cuts a little more than the finger size. Validate that. It's going to cut all of those. I'm going to go ahead and save my project. And next we'll go ahead and taper these prongs. So we're going to select that group of prongs again. Back in the solid module, we're going to do a deform taper. And we're going to select the red indicator at the bottom again. And we want to link these two sides together. So where it says link scales, check that, so we can taper it evenly in both directions. And we're just going to taper it so that we can tuck our prongs into our belts nicely, like so. Validate that, and now we have a nice tapered and bent cluster setting. Sits right on top of our ring. So let's go ahead and Boolean that all together. So we'll select everything. I'm going to do another save just in case. And Boolean. Okay, now we've got our completed cluster. So next we can build our shank for our ring, and I'll show you a kind of cool way I like to do that. So I don't have to draw, you know, if I'm not drawing any curves in this design, I'm going to go ahead and extract a curve from this prong right here. So we're going to go to extract UV curves. Okay, and select this face here on the outside of our prong. Switch to the second tab, and we're going to set our, it looks like it is the U direction, but we're going to slide it so that it's right in the middle. Okay. So figuring out the actual XY position could be a little tough, but we're just going to eyeball it right on that plane. So right down the middle, validate that, and then we're going to hide our cluster here for a second. We can hide our stones if you want as well. Now we're going to take and mirror this to the other side. So duplicate section, mirror, and then selecting these two, going to create a surface. So that's going to fill in a surface between those two. Okay, now we see that's not going to cut it quite exactly more than we needed to. So let's go back a step here. Let's delete that and delete our mirror. I'm going to move, rotate, and scale our extracted curve. So I'm just going to go ahead and scale it up a bit. So again, it's going through the finger, and then we'll come back and adjust it as needed. So go ahead and hide or delete your extracted version. It's still part of the history of the new one. And then we'll mirror that one, and then do our surface from that. Okay, so that's going to give us our cutout area for our shank that will fit perfectly with our cluster setting. So we need to get the curves from that. So we're going to select that surface and do another extract, this time a regular extract curves, and select that surface so we can get the entire outside border. Okay, so now we can hide some things again. We're going to hide that move, rotate, scale, and I'm going to rename that so I can find it. That's going to be my, let's call that our cutout curve. Okay, you can hide the mirror and the surface as well. There's our cutout area. So let's go ahead and set up our shank. So we're going to do a, from the jeweler's bench, select your ring size, go to the jeweler's bench, we're going to do a sweeping wizard. Okay. In the second tab, I'm going to select my first section by adding a section to the list and then selecting the library. Pull that library up, and then we're going to go under 2D symbols, shanks. I want a nice knife edge at the top. I'm going to use knife edge number 1, and we'll place that at the 0.5 position right at the top, and we'll add a bit of a scale to it. So turning off keep ratio, I want the height to be just less than my cutout area. Looks like 1.8, and then the width is going to be, let's go 2.1. Okay, we're going to add another section. This time we'll move it manually just here, and this one we're going to mirror. So we're going to turn on a vertical plane mirror in the last tab. And I'm going to scale that to a different height and size. So this one's going to be 1.5 wide. Oh, sorry. I'm going to keep that at, let's see, what was it at? Sorry. 1.8, 2.1 was the original. So 1.8, and then we'll make this one 1.7. Slightly smaller. We're going to add one more right in this section, and this one we're going to scale, let's go to 1.5 and 1.4. Okay, and then add one more section. This is going to be where it blends into the rest of our shank where I want a different shape. So I'm going to go to my library and open that up again. Do shanks. This time I'm going to do a half round, and we'll use half round number 2. Okay, we're going to scale that to 1.5 width and a height of 1.4. And let's see how all that looks. Okay, so we want this nice transition. We may have to go back and play around with our scaling. I think it all looks good except for there's a little bump here. Let's go ahead back to this section, and we'll add just a hair to the height. And this section we'll go back and kind of adjust the spacing a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. This part we're going to cut off, so that's all okay. So you can play around with your sections, get the shape of the ring. You can do any shape you want. I just wanted to show you this shape that I'm working on. You can validate that. So we get this nice tapered band from around into a nice knife edge in that area where it's going to connect to our cluster. So let's bring back our cluster. That's Boolean operation here. And you can unhide your stones at this point as well. Okay. And we're going to save before we do this cut. Now, if you try to crop and punch this, this is a it's a planar curve, but it doesn't always crop and punch very nicely. So I like to go ahead and extrude it. So go back to the solids and do extrusion. Now, because it's not built on a plane, it's not going to extrude in the correct direction. We're going to switch that to the Y direction. Just hit that little button next to Y so it's facing the right way. And then just make sure it's two-sided so it's going to cut through the shank. So you can pull this out like so, make sure it's going through both sides evenly. And now we can Boolean subtract. Selecting the sweeping wizard first. And there's our connection there. Okay, so that cutout is right up against that prong. We may have some Boolean issues. If you do, we can always go back into our cutout curve that we added to the move, rotate, scale to, and just kind of adjust that cutout. You can rotate it, you can play around with that until you get the cutout exactly where you want it, and just recompute your cutout. So adjust that as needed. As I get in here, I see that this tapers out a bit much here, so we can always go back into our sweeping wizard. And it looks like that section right here, I have the width is a little off. Let's go back into scaling and adjust that. I want that to be a little narrower right here. So validate and recompute. Looks like we're going in the wrong direction. Okay, actually, I think it looks better wider. Trying to figure out why is it scaling out instead of in. Let's take a look at our sweeping wizard here. Let me hide that. Probably the first section. It's wider. We can go much narrower there. Let's bring that back. There we go. Okay, so you have to play around with your shapes, get a nice connection there, however you want it to look. Otherwise, we're done. We one final step. We just Boolean it all together, and we have our nice cluster ring.